Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. Nebulan Prime was a marvel of intergalactic engineering, a city-planet where towering spires scraped against the heavens and starships darted through iridescent skies like fireflies. The Zorblat family, among the elite of Nebulonian society, lived in a shimmering estate perched on a floating platform above the planet's bustling core. Their home was a labyrinth of polished crystal hallways, glowing energy panels, and robotic attendants designed to cater to their every whim. Yet, amidst the luxury and sophistication, a shadow of neglect loomed over one peculiar resident of the Zorblat household. Grubark. Grubark was a Rendlethian hound, a breed that was considered a rare and exotic pet across the galaxy. However, Grubark's rare status didn't shield him from ridicule. Unlike the sleek, graceful creatures Nebulonians preferred as companions, Grubark was an oddity. His coat shimmered awkwardly between vibrant blue and muddy brown, depending on the light. His four floppy ears drooped unevenly, giving him a perpetually disheveled appearance. His long, double-jointed legs made his movements look clumsy, and his wide, glowing green eyes startled anyone unaccustomed to their eerie luminescence. The Zorblats had once seen Grubark as a status symbol, a living trophy of their wealth and power. But as he grew, his ungainly features became a source of embarrassment. Soon, Grubark was relegated to the farthest wing of the estate, away from guests and public view. The family's busy lives took precedence, and their interest in their peculiar pet waned. Grubark spent his days wandering the mansion, his nails clicking softly against the glass-like floors. His only companions were the bots that skittered around, polishing surfaces and tending to minor repairs. They never spoke to him, their glowing red eyes offered no warmth. He often sat by the panoramic windows, staring at the bustling city below, wishing for anything that might fill the emptiness inside him. One evening, as the Zorblats celebrated another lucrative interstellar deal in their grand dining hall, Grubark paced the lower levels of the estate. He sniffed along the baseboards, drawn by an unfamiliar scent of metallic dust and oil. His sharp senses led him to a small, unassuming door in the basement, covered in a layer of grime that hinted at years of neglect. The door was ajar, revealing the faint glow of something beyond. Grubark nudged it open with his snout and stepped into a dimly lit room filled with forgotten technology. Flickering screens lined the walls, and a central device hummed faintly, a teleportation pod. It was unlike anything Grubark had ever seen, its surface etched with alien runes that glowed faintly in response to his presence. Curiosity overwhelmed him. He padded closer, his glowing green eyes reflecting the light of the runes. His paw accidentally brushed a series of buttons on the pod's control panel, and the machine roared to life. The room filled with a rising hum as energy surged through the pod. Grubark's ears perked up in alarm, but before he could retreat, the machine enveloped him in a cascade of shimmering light. In an instant, Grubark was gone, leaving behind the quiet hum of the Zorblat estate. The teleportation pod powered down, its glow fading back into darkness as if nothing had happened. Upstairs, the Zorblats continued their celebration, blissfully unaware that their peculiar, unwanted pet had just embarked on an adventure that would change not only his life, but the fate of the galaxy itself. The first thing Grubark noticed was the air. It was thick with the scent of life, earthy, sweet, and sharp all at once. The stark sterility of Nebulan Prime was nowhere to be found. Grubark blinked, his glowing green eyes adjusting to the golden light of twin suns that hung low in the lavender sky. Around him stretched an alien landscape, a rolling meadow of crimson grass, dotted with colossal trees whose branches spiraled like corkscrews toward the heavens. Above, strange, bird-like creatures with translucent wings hovered and chirped in harmonious melodies. For the first time in his life, Grubark felt small but not insignificant. He was part of something vast, mysterious, and vibrant. Tentatively, he padded forward, the crimson blades of grass brushing against his legs. His drooping ears twitched at every sound: the rustle of wind through the alien trees, the distant thrum of an unseen river, and the occasional crackle of small creatures darting in the underbrush. Despite his loneliness, a spark of curiosity burned within him. The sun-dappled path eventually led him to a clearing, where he encountered his first inhabitants of this strange world, Virilians. These creatures were unlike anything Grabark had seen before. They were small, barely reaching his shoulder, with fur that shimmered like liquid silver under the light of the twin suns. Their wide eyes glowed faintly purple, and their faces bore expressions of wonder rather than fear as they watched the newcomer. One of the Virilians, a youngling with a curious tilt to its head, approached Grabark. Its movements were cautious but not hesitant. It chirped in a series of musical notes, a language that Grabark couldn't understand but instinctively felt was welcoming. The youngling reached out a clawed hand, and Grabark, after a brief hesitation, lowered his snout to meet it. The touch was warm, and in that moment, something inside Grabark softened. The other Virilians gathered closer, their chirps harmonizing into a melody that seemed to resonate with the landscape itself. One of them, an elder with fur streaked in shades of gold, stepped forward. It steadied Grabark for a moment before letting out a low, guttural hum. The sound reverberated in the air, and Grabark felt a strange vibration ripple through his body. It wasn't unpleasant, if anything; it felt like a greeting, a connection. The elder gestured for Grabark to follow, and the group led him through the forest to their village, nestled at the base of a towering, crystalline mountain. The village was a marvel of organic architecture. Homes were woven into the giant trees, their walls glowing faintly with bioluminescent moss. Bridges of braided vines connected the structures, swaying gently in the breeze. The Virilians brought Grabark to a central gathering area where they offered him food: small, glowing fruits that tasted like a mix of sweet nectar and earthy spice. As Grabark ate, the Virilians watched with a mixture of fascination and joy. He wasn't sure what he had done to earn their kindness, but he felt something he had never experienced before: acceptance. Days turned into weeks, and Grabark slowly adapted to life among the Virilians. They taught him to fish in the crystal-clear rivers using his sharp senses and keen reflexes. They showed him how to climb the corkscrew trees to reach their glowing fruit and introduced him to the art of weaving vines into tools and shelters. Grabark's odd features, so ridiculed on Nebulan Prime, became assets here. His 4 ears caught the faintest sounds of predators lurking in the shadows, and his double-jointed legs gave him speed and agility to evade them. For the first time in his life, Grabark felt like he belonged. The Virilians didn't care about his strange appearance; they valued his spirit, his eagerness to learn, and the companionship he offered. They gave him a new name, Greller, which in their language meant the Radiant Wanderer. But as much as Grabark thrived in his new world, a part of him couldn't shake the lingering shadow of his past. Why had the Zorblats cast him aside? What had he done to deserve their neglect? The questions gnawed at the edges of his newfound happiness, like faint echoes in the back of his mind. His days on Virilia were filled with joy, but his nights were haunted by dreams of the glassy halls of Nebulan Prime and the cold stares of the Zorblats. As much as he tried to leave that life behind, it seemed the galaxy wasn't done with him yet. And neither was his destiny. The crash came at dawn, just as Virilia's twin suns crept over the horizon. Grabark was by the river, his 4 ears twitching at the gentle trickle of water and the rustling of early morning life in the forest. Then, a deafening roar tore through the skies. The sound was like nothing he'd ever heard: metal grinding against itself, accompanied by an explosion of flames that painted the lavender sky with streaks of orange and black. He spun toward the noise, his glowing green eyes locking on a plume of smoke rising above the treetops in the distance. Instinct told him to run, but something deeper: curiosity, duty, or perhaps a spark of bravery urged him forward. Within minutes, he reached the edge of the Virilian village. The elder, flanked by other villagers, stood gazing at the smoke in the distance. They chirped and hummed among themselves, their tones filled with concern. Grabark barked urgently, his guttural sounds catching their attention. He gestured with his snout toward the smoke and took a step forward. The elder hesitated, then nodded. A group of younger Virilians joined him, armed with spears fashioned from crystal-tipped vines. Together, they set off toward the crash site. The journey took hours, the terrain growing steeper and more treacherous as they neared the source of the destruction. Grubark's 4 ears picked up faint cries voices, garbled but unmistakably Nebulonian. He broke into a sprint, the Virilians following close behind. Finally, they emerged into a clearing and saw the wreckage. The ship, sleek and unmistakably Nebulonian, lay in ruins. Its once glimmering hull was scorched and twisted, half buried in the crimson grass. A faint hum of failing energy resonated from the remains of the ship, and the acrid smell of burning circuits filled the air. Around the wreckage, several figures in torn Nebulonian uniforms staggered, coughing and clutching at injuries. The sight of the Nebulonians sent a jolt through Grubark. They looked just like the Zorblattstall, elegant and pristine, even in their disheveled state. These weren't his neglectful owners, but their resemblance was enough to stir conflicting emotions within him: anger, fear, and a strange, lingering loyalty to the people who had cast him aside. The Nebulonians spotted the approaching group and froze. Their wide, luminescent eyes darted between the towering hound and the silver-furred Virilians, panic written on their faces. "Stay back," one of them shouted, raising a weak hand. "We mean no harm." The elder Virilian stepped forward, humming a low, melodic tone that Grubark recognized as a gesture of peace. The Nebulonians didn't understand, but their fear seemed to subside when they saw the elder's non-threatening posture. Grubark took the opportunity to approach one of the injured Nebulonians, a young female clutching her arm, which was badly burned. She flinched as he came near but relaxed when he gently nudged her hand aside to inspect the wound. Without waiting for permission, Grubark barked to the Virilians, signaling them to fetch healing leaves and water from the nearby river. The younglings dashed off and returned quickly, presenting the materials to Grubark, who had watched the Virilians' healing rituals many times. Awkwardly but effectively, he applied the poultice, earning a surprised look from the Nebulonian woman. "You're helping us," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. Over the next several hours, Grubark and the Virilians worked tirelessly to tend to the injured and salvage what they could from the wreckage. As they worked, the Nebulonians began to speak, their arrogance melting into gratitude. They explained that they were explorers from a rival family to the Zorblatts, tasked with surveying uncharted planets for potential colonization. Their ship had been hit by a rogue asteroid field, and they had been forced to make an emergency landing. "You saved us," the Nebulonian woman said, her gaze fixed on Grubark. "I don't know how to thank you." Grubark simply wagged his tail, his green eyes glowing softly in the fading light of the day. As night fell, the Nebulonians huddled around a makeshift campfire, their initial mistrust of the Virilians completely gone. They marveled at the harmony between Grubark and the villagers, something they found difficult to reconcile with their own society's rigid hierarchies. One of them, a communications officer, managed to repair a small transmitter from the wreckage and sent a distress signal to Nebulan Prime. When the message was sent, the officer turned to Grubark. "When they come for us," he said, "they'll hear about you. They'll hear about what you did for us." His voice was heavy with emotion. "I've heard stories about a pet like you. From the Zorblatts. They called you useless, ugly, unworthy." The word stung, but Grubark didn't flinch. He barked softly, his tone firm and proud. "They were wrong," the officer continued. "You're more than they ever deserved." As the Nebulonians drifted off to sleep, Grubark sat by the fire, staring up at the twin moons of Virilia. He knew that when the rescue ship arrived, his life would change once again. His actions had already set something in motion, something far larger than himself. For the first time, Grubark didn't feel like an outcast. He felt like a hero. The rescue ship arrived 3 days later, its sleek, gleaming hull breaking through the lavender skies of Virilia like a silver comet. The Virilians watched from the tree line as the Nebulonian ship descended into the clearing, its landing thrusters kicking up clouds of red dust. Grubark stood at the edge of the clearing, his glowing green eyes fixed on the craft as its hatch hissed open. A delegation of Nebulonians emerged, their pristine uniforms and polished demeanor a stark contrast to the ragged survivors of the crash. Among them was a tall, imperious woman whose sharp features radiated authority, Commander Ural Zorblat, the matriarch of Grubark's former family. The survivors rushed to greet their rescuers, but all eyes quickly turned to the enormous, strange-looking hound standing beside them. Commander Ural's golden eyes widened as she recognized him. Her mouth opened slightly in shock, but she quickly composed herself, her expression hardening. "Grubark," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" The Nebulonian survivors spoke up before Grubark could react, recounting the tale of how he and the Virilians had saved them. They described his quick thinking, his bravery, and his leadership in organizing the rescue effort. As they spoke, the stiff Nebulonian delegation began to soften, their rigid postures giving way to murmurs of astonishment. "Is this true?" Commander Ural asked, her gaze shifting between the survivors and Grubark. "It is," one of the survivors said, stepping forward. "He saved our lives. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't be here. He's more than a pet. He's extraordinary." Ural's expression faltered, the weight of their words cutting through her cold exterior. Her gaze lingered on Grubark, and for the first time, there was something in her eyes that resembled regret. But before she could say anything more, the Virilian elder stepped forward. The silver-furred leader hummed a low, resonant tone, addressing the Nebulonian delegation. The Nebulonian translator bot activated, rendering the words into a synthesized voice. "This being," the elder said, gesturing to Grubark, "has become one of us. He is no longer defined by the neglect of his past, but by the bonds he has forged here. He is family to Virilia." Commander Ural's lips tightened, and she glanced at the Nebulonian delegation. The weight of public perception loomed large in her mind. Grubark's story would inevitably reach the wider galaxy, and it would reflect poorly on the Zorblats if their abandonment of him were revealed. "We thank you for your care of him," Ural said carefully. "But he belongs with us." At this, Grubark barked sharply, shaking his head. He turned to the elder and then back to the Nebulonians, his meaning unmistakable: "I belong here." The survivors stepped forward to defend him. "With all due respect, Commander," one of them said, "he's found a place where he's valued. Maybe he doesn't need to return to Nebulan Prime." A tense silence fell over the clearing as the commander weighed her options. The Virilians stood firm, their glowing eyes reflecting solidarity. Finally, Ural exhaled and nodded. "Very well," she said reluctantly. "Let it be known that Grubark is no longer a ward of the Zorblat family, but a citizen of Virilia. His actions here will not go unrecognized." With that, the delegation departed, their pristine ship lifting off into the lavender sky. The survivors, now healed and ready to leave, expressed their gratitude to the Virilians and Grubark. They promised to share his story with the galaxy, ensuring that his bravery and newfound happiness would not go unnoticed. In the months that followed, Grubark's tale spread across the stars. News feeds and holochannels across the galaxy chronicled the story of the ugly alien dog who had been neglected but found his purpose on a distant world. Grubark became a symbol of resilience and acceptance, his name whispered in reverence on planets far beyond Virilia. Nebulonian society, long obsessed with appearances and status, began to shift. Grubark's story challenged deeply ingrained prejudices, inspiring others to reconsider how they valued those who were different. The Zorblats faced public backlash for their treatment of him, and even Commander Ural admitted her regret in a rare public statement. On Virilia, Grubark thrived. He became a trusted guardian of the village and a beloved companion to the Virilians, who honored him as a hero. His glowing green eyes no longer drew scorn but admiration, and his 4 drooping ears became a badge of uniqueness rather than ridicule. Years later, under the light of Virilia's twin suns, Grubark stood atop the crystalline mountain overlooking the village. Around him, Virilian children played, their laughter echoing in the wind. In the distance, starships occasionally passed overhead, visitors drawn by the legend of the Radiant Wanderer. As he gazed at the sky, Grabark felt a deep sense of peace. His journey had taken him far from the sterile halls of Nebulan Prime, but he had found what he had always longed for, a home where he was truly seen, valued, and loved. And the galaxy, once indifferent, now marveled at the hound who had shown them the true meaning of belonging.